Ich habe mir gerade die Absolution eingeholt. Ich mache die Einführung in Deutsch und auch ganz kurz, damit wir so schnell wie möglich das Wort an Richard Tuttle und Dieter Schwarz übergeben können. Im Dialog über Ideen, Orte und Werke haben wir das Gespräch genannt. Damit sind die zentralen Themen bereits angerissen, die alle aufs engste verknüpft sind mit dem langjährigen Austausch und der Freundschaft, die Richard Tuttle und Agnes Martin verband. Vor wenigen Wochen erschien, und Sie haben es vielleicht schon gesehen, endlich, muss man sagen, erschien es, das einzige gemeinsame oder eines der gemeinsamen künstlerischen Projekte, Religion of Love. Hier verbinden sich die kurzen Texte und aphoristischen Statements von Agnes Martin mit den Zeichnungen von Richard Tuttle. Diese Zusammenarbeit kam auf Wunsch von Agnes Martin zustande, die Tuttle bat, ihre um 1990 verfassten Texte zu illustrieren. Ein einzigartiges Projekt, das zweifellos den vertrauensvollen und intensiven Gedankenaustausch der beiden Künstler unterstreicht. Berührungspunkte hatten sie wahrlich viele. Beide lebten zeitweise in der brodelnden Metropole New York, aber auch in der weiten Einsamkeit New Mexikos. Sie begegneten sich im New York der 1960er Jahre, Martin Anfang ihrer 40er, Richard Tuttle fast 20 Jahre jünger. Es verband die beiden, so stelle ich mir vor, die Suche nach Schönheit, eine tiefe Spiritualität und sicher auch ihre ungeheure geistige Neugier. Ihre Freundschaft hat Spuren hinterlassen. Ohne Richard Tuttles Empfehlung hätte wohl Agnes Martins erste Ausstellung in Deutschland 1973 im Kunstraum München nicht stattgefunden oder vielleicht erst viel später. Bereits im Vorjahr waren beide auf der Documenta von Harald Seemann vertreten. In New York stellten sowohl Martin als auch später Richard Tuttle bei Betty Parsons aus. Tuttle erstmals 1974, Martin dann 1986 bei Annemarie und Gianfranco Werner in Zürich. In Düsseldorf, und das wissen Sie alle, war Richard Tuttle seit Ende der 60er Jahre wahrlich kein Unbekannter, denn er hatte seine erste Einzelausstellung 1968 in der Galerie Schmäler, in diesen schönen Räumen, es waren noch die alten Räume, Entschuldigung. Die zweite Ausstellung fand dann in den neuen Räumen statt, in diesem Haus, was wir heute als dritten Standort nutzen können. Im Moment bereitet Richard Tuttle eine Einzelausstellung vor, die Ende Februar im Kunstmuseum Winterthur eröffnet wird. Er tut dies auf Einladung von Dieter Schwarz. Und insofern war es eine glückliche Fügung. Die beiden sind seit vielen Jahren im Dialog. In Winterthur gibt es ein großes Konvolut von Arbeiten von Richard Tuttle und also eine schon langjährige Auseinandersetzung. Dieter Schwarz, er hat deutsche und französische Literatur, Linguistik und Komparatistik studiert, ist seit 1990 der Direktor dieses weit über die Grenzen Winterthurs und der Schweiz hinaus wahrgenommenen Kunstmuseum Winterthur. Gerhard Richter hat wohl einmal gesagt, es sei sein Lieblingsmuseum. Er hat dort zahlreiche Ausstellungen gezeigt, zur Kunst der historischen Moderne bis zur Gegenwart, insbesondere zur neueren amerikanischen, italienischen und deutschen Kunst. Ich will nur einige Namen nennen: Medard Rosso, Pierre Bonnard, Bryce Marden, Fred Sandbeck, Gerhard Richter, Pia Fries. Bereits kurz nach Beginn seiner dortigen Tätigkeit hat Dieter Schwarz 1992 Agnes Martin ausgestellt. 11 Gemälde waren dort damals zu sehen, zahlreiche Zeichnungen sowie die druckgrafische Folge On a Clear Day. Statt eines Kataloges erschien damals, und es mag vielleicht, ich weiß nicht genau, wie rum das Verhältnis war, statt Katalog oder wegen der Ausstellung, die Schriften, da werden Sie sicher noch was zu sagen, erschien auf jeden Fall dieses wichtige Buch Agnes Martin, Schriften, Writings. Dieses Buch, von Dieter Schwarz übersetzt und herausgegeben, ist eine unerschöpfliche Quelle für jeden, der sich mit der Gedankenwelt der Malerin befassen will. Insofern ist es hochgradig bedauerlich, dass diese Ausgabe seit langem vergriffen ist und eine Neuedition wohl vorläufig nicht in Sicht. Es hätte also nicht besser kommen können. Richard Tuttle und Dieter Schwarz sprechen gemeinsam über Agnes Martin und ich freue mich sehr, dass das gelungen ist.
Good evening. Richard and I, we have had many conversations in the past decades, and some of these conversations were around Agnes Martin. And I remember very well when not so long ago in the collection of our museum, we were in this room, in this gallery of American painting, where one Agnes Martin painting is hanging, and Richard pointed out to me the difference between this painting and the paintings of, let's say, Philip Guston, Robert Mangold, Bryce Martin, other American artists, which were also hanging in the same gallery. And he was very sharp on these American painters and very laudatory towards Agnes Martin. And so I hope that some of this lively speech will come back in this conversation which we'll have tonight. I just wanted to add something which Maria has not mentioned. I'm sorry, Maria, but there has been one exhibition in 1998 in the Fort Worth Museum of Art of Agnes Martin and Richard Tuttle, and in the catalogue of this exhibition, Agnes Martin gives a short interview on Richard Tuttle, and Richard Tuttle a short interview on Agnes Martin, and this is very anecdotal, and we decided last week already that we would not like to speak so much about the person of Agnes Martin, but about the work of hers. And so the anecdotes can be read in the Fort Worth catalogue, and now we go towards the work.
We make a moratorium on the person and find out what most we can use this symposium to help us to get closer to the actual work.
Still, maybe just to start, as a starter, you could say something about the moment when the first time you encountered work of Agnes's. This was in the 60s, and what your reaction or your reading of that work was at the time.
I went to school in Hartford, Connecticut, and we had probably the most important curator of contemporary art named Sam Wagstaff, who had come to work at that museum. And because we were the only two people interested in art in the town, we naturally found each other. And he actually had been waiting years to have a position in the museum, although he graduated from the School of Fine Arts. But he had this exhibition he wanted to call Black, White, and Gray. And it was a show was paying attention to certain ideas of minimalism, and I went up for that exhibition, and on the train Agnes was also on the train, and I saw her, and a little voice went off in my head, that person has something to say to you. And then I must say I did not fully appreciate the work, but nevertheless, things proceeded, and I threw my life away to become a pilot in the U.S. Air Force, and thought, well, that gives me the courage to call up Agnes Martin and as my parting gesture for the next 35 years. I bought a drawing, and I bought the most advanced drawing of hers, which was possible because I think I grasped the work in a very fundamental way that perhaps even she didn't grasp, but realized I was valuable to her and her work, and then she just said, "Come back anytime." And that was. But want to say that I would like in this discussion to get to a place where we can understand what happens when she's using graphite on canvas, and the result is not a line but a broken line. She actually uses the canvas as a positive force to break a line, whereas it would be normal, most people would say she uses canvas to record a line. She's actually doing the opposite. And that's, but then what she can make a drawing, and there's the line, of course, is perfectly straight. But I think somehow for her, the luminosity of the paper, because she used a very translucent type of paper, which was German pre-war, by the way, that luminosity meant something for her. I mean, I'm talking about in her work, that the broken line means. Because she's very much part of the school that faced the project of, on the one hand you could say breaking the horizon, and that's why she could feel very good about Andy Warhol, because he also was part of that project. And on the other hand, she was, for example, the issues of humility or against ego or power were also her way of connecting with a larger program that she was very happy to contribute to, but she herself did not feel she was the whole project.
Maybe we come back on the line, because the line, it's a very special idea that the painter would work with a line.
Yeah.
And Agnes Martin belongs to a generation of artists, which all of them had to reinvent paintings, had to find out what a painting basically could be. And they had to make their own inventions about how such a painting could be done. This was not an obvious thing anymore. And the moment when, as Agnes Martin says, she was on the right track, means she had invented something. And this was really a basic step to invent drawing on painting, which is visual, so different from painting.
Yeah, in a certain sense, I think she, even not in a mystical sense, but in some actual sense, as an artist, she herself had become painting. So when she would look at her own work, I'm just, thanks to the Symposium and other speakers, I can form this idea where she would feel that a certain work was actually not coming, this phrase, the right thing, or, but it was really, she didn't feel the identification with the already pre-established unity between painting and herself. So it was, every time and time again, each new work was re-aimed, and I think that that art is a case where the artist takes their essence or soul or spirit or being and puts it into a poem, a piece of theater, architecture, or so on. And then how the society uses that is they then, as it were, turn it back and go to this person. And whether they're schizophrenic or paranoid or gay or whatever, I mean, that's up to you, you like to be in that space, you don't like to be in that space, fine, but that's not in an artist of Agnes's quality, it's a simply offered, not out of ego, but out of art or the that. Well, this is the point, that the society is the one who's invented art. So the artist just offers that naturally back to the society in as rich a way as possible, just thinking innocently, if I may use that word, that somebody in the society will trace the way back to its origin, which is open. It's, I think, one of the reasons I agreed to come here is for the young artists and trying to do what I can to keep artists, Agnes's art, as open and available as I believe it is to be. And I don't approve of any kind of efforts to pigeonhole her or narrow her work or explain it, because it's simply not useful to young artists. You know, to anything less than as open as it is not going to be useful. You know?
Maybe not explain it, but just perceive it, or look at it, or try to see what she's actually has been doing. And if you say that society invents art and the artist shares in it, the artist takes up something. So you could also maybe argue that the grid, for instance, is not something which had to be invented. The grid was there since early modernism in different ways. Mm. And it's interesting that the grid in Agnes's work is there at some moment. It's not like a development. The grid is not something being developed into work. It is there at some point, and it's there very radically. And then she works with the grid. She uses the grid for her purposes.
Yeah, I think in a certain a question I have is, you know, after she did the essentials, there's always a circle in the work where she's has to be understood as someone who's beginning with a stretched canvas. And then something no one has mentioned that's extremely important is she puts a ground on that stretched canvas. And I believe the magic that she finally achieves in the painting somehow comes from the way she applies the gesso, prepares the canvas. There's energy. It is not all over, even by. I mean, you mentioned the grid. It couldn't be farther than what the grid does. But nevertheless, the grid comes next. And it is a further magnification. You're getting closer to a developed end. But surprisingly, if that end is reached, and this is why she's so self-critical, at that very moment, it turns completely around and you're back at the beginning again. And it's I often find it very useful with Agnes to think of her work as a kind of vortex, because there's so many different courses coming in, and she really sits at the end of the minimal period, but not yet at the beginning of the next period. And she used that for all it's worth and allowed painting to have a richer subject matter in the fluidity she found just there, at that point. And I think it's also, again, for the younger artists, that the sorry, I don't complete my sentences and I don't think linearly. I apologize, but she, her project, and I'm sorry if I say the word her, but the Works project is toward achieving abstraction. And it's already a considerable thing to understand or to take that position, because we experienced a world that clearly could not handle abstraction. And then she came along and said, well, the problem, why the world can't handle subject-free. I mean, even someone like Rauschenberg just did the same abstract expressionist compositions, but gave you something to look at, and everybody was thrilled with that. But Agnes came along, and oops, sorry, there I did it again. The work came along, and it's the intensity is that she really, really wants to make something that, and talk about ambition, talking about who you're going to sleep with, is nothing compared to achieving abstraction, the ambition in achieving abstraction. So I just also kind of want to say that I've learned that, if the starting point, if you accept as a starting point that artists lie, you're much more on firm ground than if you believe everything that an artist said is what they think. And the other thing is that with Agnes and her work, you have to weave yourself into go critically, so you can tell the difference between what is coming from this inspired, like prophetic, brilliant mind, and what is just not even worth taking the time to sneeze at, so kind of thing, yeah. And everybody can do that. That's what we do.
But if you speak about abstraction, I mean, you refer mostly to the abstraction of the abstract expressionist generation, I understand. You said minimalist, but maybe we leave that aside because this is something else. This is mostly sculptural. But to think about the way the picture plane was used or invented by Pollock or by Barnett Newman, to have by Pollock the line defining the picture plane, and not a flat plane or the figure. This is maybe the point where Agnes gets in and invents her use of the grid. And what is interesting also is that the grid with her in the beginning, it's an image. It's something like she treats as an image. There's always a border there. It's like it's there. It's an image which she reproduces, which she paints, but it's not the all over yet. The all over comes then maybe mid-60s with these very radical grid paintings.
Yeah, I feel for our, we should all be aware that the square as such started at 78 inches. And some of the image, well, I think there's one upstairs that is actually the 78, and then it came down to this classical period of the 6 foot square, and then and I liked pointing out of this period of these white divine, maybe they began in 60. It was actually the period when I was closest to Agnes, because she just come out of the insane, and I was just trying to find my first baby footsteps, and that we had a lot we had a real conversation because we each needed the kind of person the other one was. But again, that does not, I feel one of the great things in my life was watching her develop that group of paintings that really happened after the Night Sea period. Okay, so I feel too that what's extraordinarily important of Agnes, and even Agnes didn't say this, is that she faced the problem of describing the world. and she realized that every description of the world, whether it's embedded in religion or in philosophy or so on, is always delivered as if the form is there as a result of some force behind it. And she, on her own terms, made this body of art, which is a extraordinary demonstration that form comes into the world without a force behind it. And I mean, I can't imagine a greater contribution that a creative person has made to society than that, because my life has really improved because I don't have to look at everything as if some force is, responsible for it. There's no force responsible for it. It's like her painting,
But you say form. She once mentioned the word formless, the interesting formlessness, or the dissolution of forms, and I think this is not just a statement, this is also something you can see in a painting. She has a square, but she never repeats the square, she does rectangles. She has a line, but she never has the line is split up, as you say, on the coarse surface of the canvas, the line becomes something different. Or then she, later in the line paintings, she does these paintings which seem so simple, at the same time you never can grasp them with your perception because you always try to focus on a point and you'll forget about the rest of the painting. So it's all there, the form, at the same time it's completely impossible to grasp and it's formless.
Yes, but I think another vortex that she sits right at is the relation of what you're saying, which is true if you think about the plane or the what do we say, the space. Let's just say space. And I think it's, again, for the young artist, it's unbelievably interesting how she developed her art through first actually achieving the space. And that's why you have to think of it in terms, unlike the abstract expressionists who began with nothing, as she began with a stretched canvas. And at that point, very surprisingly, but I think very intelligently, she put herself, without maybe intending, in a position where she could paint that to achieve the space that she needed. That was step one. And then the next was this issue of the grid, and I find, I love what you say about the grid, but I find it's very useful to think of her friend Ellsworth Kelly, who actually voided the field of painting, of line, and which was very dramatic, very successful for art. But Agnes understood that however he did that, for whatever reason, it could be reversed, and in fact it should be reversed. It's like Ellsworth produced a thesis, and so Agnes was in a position to do the thesis, and the grid is how you get as many lines back on the surface of painting as possible. There's no other way you can get that many lines on a surface without making a grid. And then simultaneously, that grid that came back, and I think she probably was surprised by this, was actually a very important statement of time, and also recording time. And this is and because she did that, she moved from space to form. And if you want to know, that's something that happened historically at this period. It happened in Europe just as America. Like, oh gosh, I could, Immendorf, for example, or I mean, there are so many examples. I mean, Blinky Palermo is a perfect example. How did he get from the space or the plane to form, and that it's because of that, I saw my contribution to be a question of how because form can't exist. I mean, even though space can exist in the world, undefined, form cannot exist in the world. Look at the Platonic solids. But that cried out for the next generation to come along and characterize not space, but characterize form. And so it's a lineage, and it's a project that's much bigger than any one of these individual artists we're talking about.
Well, Ellsworth took the way out by making an object out of the painting, so he was not responsible for painting anymore. It was the easy way out. Agnes, in the contrary, remained responsible for painting and continued to paint till the end. There's nothing which is not painting.
I like that, but I also find it's totally fascinating how the painting in North America, and the smart artists understand they have to to make a painting, to achieve a painting without painting. And these drips of Pollock are simply a way of making a painting without having to paint, you know. And Newman Zips, I mean, he's the worst painter I've ever seen in my life, you know. And that's like good, you know, because, I mean, he's in a way sets up a whole avenue toward, what do they call it, bad painting, you know. But Agnes' way of making a painting without painting was to invent the graphite on canvas. That is just as much as Pollock putting enamel on canvas. Agnes, graphite on canvas, and she's smart enough to step up there at the top level. You know.
But the definition of doing painting without painting applies also to your work. I mean, you describe very much what you have been doing for a long time. Also, the grid is there. The grid is often there as a background or something you superimpose or you work with or at or on.
But I have a little out because I do. I think in the end of everything, I would be a sculptor, and so I have this wonderful tradition of polychrome. Or not polychrome, and that when I use paint, and I do that, I play with that for fun. That what might appear initially as a ridiculous effort toward painting winds up being a brilliant example of polychroming, you know. And I love that, you know, and in one single piece, you know, like that. Yeah.
But maybe we can come back to the notion of time, which you introduced, because the drawing a grid is you use a lot of time, but also reading the grid, you use time. You cannot just perceive it at one moment. You start looking at it and you find yourself lost in this labyrinthal structure, and you use just time to read and to look. Yes. And I think that's an important aspect of that work, which is in this way contrary to this American modernist idea of just grasp it at one moment, is Tony Smith's idea, which you of course know.
Yes, and that is a bit of a paradox, but I recently was in Malmö, Switzerland, and they made a show from the collection in Sweden. Yes, not Switzerland. Yeah, that's yeah. But the exhibition was trying to show the relation between dance and painting. And so you had a lot of these Simone Forte and Yvonne Rainer, who are obviously a direct, in this school, but a link to the fundamental idea of the school is that you can achieve space. You can make this new space, call it abstract expressionist space, whatever, but it's a space people like to look at. You know, how do you achieve that? and the answer that goes back to Pollock is by recording movement. And so, like, even in Agnes's case, which I love that, so we live in New Mexico, but looking down that road and seeing the fence posts, and this, and that it isn't a structure, a kind of constructivism. It's her way of recording movement. Every time she puts a line like that, and that the painting then the achievement of the space in the painting is because you have used time, you've used real time the way you might use real paint. And I think that's happened just because Americans are bad. They don't paint. They can't paint. So but that the pluses and like Agnes is I think a great example because she had no gift for draftsmanship in the classical sense. She would not be the kid in school. You'd say, "Oh my gosh, you're such a good draftsman. You should be an artist." That would not be Agnes. But in turn, she invented a draftsmanship that was better than or at least equal to some of the greatest draftsmen ever on earth. That's with the grid.
What you said about the movement, about the time, probably also applies to her writings. Because when I edited his writings and when I reread them recently, I thought this is not a discourse, this is not a development of thoughts, this is like a flowing movement, there are repetitions. It's very similar, like if you look at one painting from top to the bottom, you go through many, many stages and it's all repeating, but every time look at it differently. And so her reading these writings are, to me, very similar. It's like lectures, it's like preaching, it's something else than a discursive development of an idea.
I think this is this case where I have to go back to this when I first met Agnes, and there I go speaking about her, but we walked on the street and I had to run into a shop, but as I went into the shop, I said something like, "Well, you can hear they're playing jazz. They're playing a major jazz composition." And she completely refused. She just thought jazz was this terrible thing that should. And it was such a gift because as much as I respected her or admired her, that I realized she wasn't perfect. Somebody. And that set me very early on this course with for example, I would like to share with the audience another reason Agnes is at this vortex, and because art needed somebody to be at this vortex. She's simply a servant of art. And she had the attributes that art needed. So anyway, Rothko built the space horizontals. Newman built the space verticals. Gottlieb said it's a divided space. And that's the totality of the construction. Those three contradictory forces all going on. Agnes had, in the grid, already had the horizontal, she had the vertical. But what she added was that plane, if read from the left to right, produces an exceptional concept of structure. But if you read it from the right to the left, it produces an emotional expression of originality, of profundity, of intensity. And so the painting has this, she reached this divided aspect. And why that's important, because with art demands that the viewer suspend their disbelief. So the artist, one way the artist does that is by showing that they can do the same thing in two equal and opposite ways. So Agnes's art shows us that she, and I'm clearly in this case making a difference between the person and the work. That the work shows us that Agnes, the achievement of, why it's worth spending your moments looking at her painting is because she has proved your respect for, for the art which is even beyond her individual protection. And I know that offends a lot of people in the audience. I'm sorry about that. But I do think unless we feel that we have I think I'm going to back off from that because I know I'm getting a little bit too dictatorial.
But this you consider as Agnes's unique contribution. This is something which in Gottlieb and in the abstract expressionist you do not find yet, that what you tried to describe before. This is a step in another direction.
In American art, you have an extraordinary example in the sea paintings, the night sea of Ryder, of Albert Pinkham Ryder, where you have the moon and the dark sailing ship. And it's almost identical as looking at a Gottlieb painting. And this, I think it connects with the notion of even politically, it's just amazing. A country that size with that many people only fundamentally has two political parties. There's this divided, we're always divided between the reds and the blues, and this on-off, black-white information system that, and I think Agnes, this is one of the points where, that right from the beginning, Agnes was trying to do something about the problem. And that's one reason I admire her, because most artists just hold up a mirror to the world and say, that's art. And then some try to express what it is, what the world is, and then the third kind of artist tries to do something about it, and that's the kind of artist Agnes was. Yeah.
Another activist would have been Ad Reinhardt, and I would like to bring in his name because as a painter he's of her generation, and equally he tries to invent a kind of painting, and a painting which is very hard to perceive. And it is in the 60s. He also works with these geometrical strict structures. At the same time, he dissolves completely the structures because you cannot see them at once. So maybe you would like to elaborate on Ad Reinhardt's relation to Agnes.
Well, someone's touched on that a bit. My recollection is that literally the day Agnes left New York was the day Ad died. Maybe there was a day in between, but that's a sort of a indication of how the artist the orbit of the artists are in. The situation had changed such that, I mean, you know, people always look for reasons, and people might say that Ed simply couldn't handle his success. You could say that about Agnes too, that she couldn't handle. But I would like to contribute that when Agnes came to explain to me why she was leaving town, it was hard to understand. But one thing she said was quite amazing. She said that you know, I've always not known where my work was going, and from this point, I know that I know. I can predict. I can see where my work is going, and I don't want to live like that. You know, I'd rather give up the work than and be back and never knowing the next place. And oddly enough, the first painting that she made when she came back, and no one has also mentioned that, which I find very, very important, is that the grid paintings are addressed toward issues of perception, and the stripe paintings are geared to issues of recognition, and that's one often says that you perceive an airplane, but you recognize a B-52. And she addressed the perception, the issues of perception, to a point where she dealt with the heights of spiritual achievement, whether it's in whatever tradition, Zen or Islam or so on, or mystic. But when she began painting again, she addressed the issues of happiness, which are, I mean, if you want to say, do you like seeing that B-52? It's better if you're happy than not happy. So whatever your recognition is should make you happy. So that's where it's, and she kept on that same track until the late paintings, the verbal, the titling reflected happiness, the happiness of children. And I have a painting which she was very proud of, because she showed certain Hispanic people who had no idea of contemporary art, and she would show them her painting, and they'd say, "Well, what's that about?" You know, and she would say, "That's where babies come from," and the person would look at it and said, "You're absolutely right. That's where babies come from."
So we are towards the end of our conversation, and also of Agnes's life. Maybe I just would like to ask the question: you had this duty to illustrate these last writings, or this short text. What does illustrate mean in your position towards such as text, or towards Agnes Martin?
Well, one, I know she had a very strong, interesting, powerful idea of illustration, which I never really understood. All my books, of which there are many, are always, I use illumination, not illustration. So this was completely different, but I thought maybe I could learn what illustration really means by doing it. But I also felt that because I wasn't very close to Agnes at the end, that this was possibly, because she wanted me to do this, that was giving me a possibility to say goodbye to her that I didn't have in life. You know. So that was another reason for saying yes. But then, as time went on, I guess I felt that there was just a touch of this where it's like, I mean, she is a prophet, you know, and that book, you know, you have the religion of love. I mean, if you look at Judaism, all the monotheistic religions, Christianity and Islam, there is a progression. I mean, if you're open-minded to that. But it's still, the open is still, the lineage can go on. So where is it going to go on? So Agnes's one of her last projects is to make this book called The Religion of Love. You know? And it is, I mean, I've been studying monotheistic religions recently, and it is an improvement over most monotheistic religions. So, however, I'm not interested in religion. I'd rather have something that is actually beyond religion. So I think in the end, that gave me a permission to make as beautiful a book as I possibly could in my own terms, and that, you know, might be just what Agnes wanted. It certainly would be what I wanted, but it, you know, it's hopefully what other people would want. You know, so anyway, as a book person, your judgment is very important to me.
I hope that this speech has helped to illuminate Richard's reading of Agnes's paintings, and maybe the audience would like to ask questions regarding this, what has been said.
Oh.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, regarding the line, I would like to ask both Richard Tuttle and Dieter Schwarz. On one hand, Richard Tuttle, you have said that actually by putting the graphite onto the canvas, Agnes Martin was actually breaking the line and therefore somehow belonging to those artists from her generation who had to break the line, break the painting. On the other hand, Dieter Schwarz has also said that unlike her colleagues, Agnes Martin somehow succeeded in preserving the painting while painting. So maybe we could think that she succeeded in that by preserving the line as well. On the other side, on the other hand, the grid is again breaking the line, but with other lines. So my question to both of you is, did Agnes Martin rather overcome the line by breaking it, or did she actually break the line and yet preserve it?
I think that's now we're getting someplace. I love that we're talking about the work. Okay, I have enormous admiration for this artist. The capacities of this artist, the intelligence is just phenomenal. Not perhaps trained, but the natural intelligence. Okay, so she understands that we operate as if there's a line in front of us. And this is good, and that's bad. You know, this is also horizontal. This is up. But basically, the vertical. But the truth is, there is no such line, as Leonardo da Vinci said. He says, there's no line in nature. Okay. It's rare in this world to come in front of an artist who knows that, like Leonardo. But what happens is something falls on the side of painting or something falls on the side of drawing. However, in both cases, the artist is there to make us believe this line exists, even though they know it doesn't exist. And what's so extraordinary in Agnes's painting is she used the grid, the graphite line, which is such a close to drawing, the drawing side of things. And so you look at the painting and you say, oh my gosh, is this the first time that an artist has come along and I must say that she is born on a cusp. There are lots of natural schizophrenic aspects of her God-given personality as opposed to her mind. And that's another extraordinary thing about Agnes's work, that her God-given expanse is very similar to her mental conditions. Anyway, so you look at the painting, you say, as many people who criticize her and her work, of which there are legion, say, oh, these aren't paintings, these are drawings. And fine. But when at a certain moment you say it can't, in this world, it cannot be both drawing and painting. And then at that moment you realize these lines are in fact painting, not drawing. And it switches over there, and she appears to you as a painter. She was so aware of herself, unlike many artists I've ever known, where she could actually, where she couldn't control her paranoia, she could control her means of art making. And I think the viewer is in a position to, the control has nothing to do with the psychology, it has to do with art, And that's just, your mouth drops open, because in some sense, somebody like her would naturally look for some coping mechanism. But what you're seeing is not coping mechanism at all. It's about art. And so that's why she's a towering figure of the 20th century. I mean, of all art, of all time.
If I just add something, if you draw a line on a 6 by 6 feet canvas, a gesso plane, you do something which you can see, but you almost cannot see it. You are far away from the canvas, and the line almost disappears. You see the whole canvas, and you see how it is divided. The plane is divided. You go closer to the canvas, and you cannot see the whole of the canvas anymore, and you see the line. And you see the relationship of the line to the plane. And if you draw a second line, you have the relationship between the two lines, and on and on. And these are not binary static relationships, but this is a dynamism which is started and which never ends. And so that's, I think, the function or the possibility of the line, very briefly.
That's why I objected earlier to the bifurcation, because if ever you saw something that was not bifurcated, I mean, it's so close to textile where we can talk about bifurcation, but the lines of Agnes, ultimately they are where they are, and then it's on your side to see them or not see them, or how much you can see them and so on, but they're fine, I mean, they're not going to go anywhere, which is in the world of bifurcation.
Yeah, this is a question to both of you, because perhaps one of you can tell me. The question comes from when I was approaching her, is from my artistic own research, and it comes from my broken heart, which have to do with the night sea, and another painting in oil, which is here, the violet, and then one line black, and then And a question that all the time haunts me is she drops oil painting at that point. Does any of you have an idea or a feeling what brings her to leave it? Because that's a point where 100 roads can happen. Also in the line and what I call the color line and all, could be also. But my question comes because I realize in her also that what she's doing, she's creating a space. And that
you don't have a question.
Space of depth, which is, for me, matrix, it has to do with the question where children come from. So that space, and in these paintings, in the oil, there were some possibilities, glorious, to continue. And it's a big riddle for me. I don't know if any of you knows why she drops oil at that point in life. I mean, it will take 40 years to come back
many
to
artists
that
in the
point.
60s dropped oil in favor of acrylic. Barnett Newman did, Robert Motherwell did. You could just make a very long list. And this is just practical reasons. It's a painting, it's a practice. So.
I know. But is it only practical? I don't know. I think she entered the deep waters there and
I learned
worried.
I learned this from a student, one of my students, because I asked him, well, you want to paint so quickly, why don't you use acrylic? Or he's using oil, and he said, oh, I could never use acrylic after Agnes Martin. Because she did the most beautiful thing you can do with acrylic, and nobody can do anything with acrylic after she did. And what he meant was she thinned it down, because it's always a question of the pigment and the medium, and so in the medium's a kind of plastic. It's not intrinsically beautiful, but she made it beautiful because she thinned the pigmentation down, and that's why people have been so critical of her that she painted the paintings on the side. The horizontal stripes were actually painted vertically, but that's because she needed the paint had to be so thin because this is the kind of thing I hope the conference would be, because I find a day doesn't go by without learning something about Agnes's work I didn't know the day before. And we can exchange new, share ideas that once you actually see the painting, you get involved, then you love sharing your idea with. But if you're just looking at the painting, like there's nothing to say.
So she didn't share the secret. She didn't talk about that. We would not know. Practically, I know the difference.
I think I do remember that point, and also, but there's also a period of mixing, and it wasn't the Night Sea, but there was a painting where she just wanted to make small strokes, and there must have been 25, 30,000 of these small strokes, and she invited me to paint them, and that was oil, and it had to be oil, and because it was, this is one thing also about Agnes, the contradiction, and a lot of what she writes, you could say is philosophy or philosophical, but I think the artist's real job is to contradict themselves, and she would make this cold, seemingly cold painting, and you can go upstairs, but if you want to look at sensuality of materials and painting. You know, I mean, it's like Ang doesn't even come close to her sensuality. You know, so it's, and in fact, you know, a great mind like Agnes needed art because there wasn't anything in the world that could hold her enormous, you know, herself. You know, and I actually wanted to ask the gentleman I was rude to, and I apologize publicly, but whether you know, she did have these devoted friends. I mean, people who would protect her, and I can see myself in that role too. But why? You know, what was it about her? And I wanted to ask him if he thought it was her actual creativity, was, you know, and that her ability to contradict herself, and in terms of, I mean, I could understand that she just changed the materials in order to see if she could conquer them or make them as beautiful as oil paint. You know, I mean, contradict herself. You know that, and she needed. I mean, by choosing the square, the pencil, the gesso. She limited her resources so extremely that she forced herself to dip into her creative resources in order to renew herself. But she also knew that what art finally offers most to us is renewal. So how is it going to renew us if she's not renewed? You know.
But I think you should give a chance to other people to.
I recognize that the graphite lines sometimes shake a little bit. So it's not, of course it's straight, but when you really go into the detail, you will recognize that it's a little bit shaking. And I don't know why, but maybe because of the surface of the canvas. And my question is, because I think that she is showing that she's not trying to avoid that, and my question is if we could say that she's showing by that the kind of truth, by showing the material as it how it behaves on another material, and that this could be a kind of, I don't like to use the word declaration of the world, but kind of showing the truth.
I think, you know, this is, again, not very in fashion at the moment, but if you look at art production all over the world, the definition of art and the artist involves someone who can make something that is, you know, dead and into something that's alive. And it's been mentioned that Agnes was a very powerful critic of her own work, and she, I remember she left a painting at my place with the instructions to throw it out, and I just thought it was the most beautiful painting I'd ever seen, and I just couldn't throw it out. And months went by, and finally, I just that either you know, like with the artist, you take it all or you take it nothing, you know. And it's not like the rest where you like this quality and you don't like that. And so if I, you know, respect Agnes as an artist, and even if I don't agree with her instructions to me, it's impossible for me not to throw out the painting if she asked me to, and so I did. You know. And I don't feel badly about that, because in a way, whatever the values the world might have, it's better if I respect the artist. And I'm going that distance because finally it's Agnes's own sense of whether she made something alive with these very constricted set of materials that counts. You know. And because I can attest to you as her friend that she knew the difference between life and death, you know, and this is also one of her contributions to the world. You know.